over Labor Day weekend, we heard rumors that there were plans to deport dozens, perhaps hundreds of Guatemalan kids that weekend. We heard about it on Friday afternoon and started trying to put together what that might mean and whether there was something we could do about it.
Welcome back, familia, to the Freedom to Thrive podcast, Resistance, Justice, and Resilience, where we talk about how to survive, thrive, and fight back in these times, because these are some wild times. My name is Hector Flores, and I'm really excited about our show today. Not all heroes wear capes. Some of them are fighting in the courtroom. And today on the show, we have an amazing guest, a fighter, advocate, defender of justice. He was named Times Magazine 100 Most Influential Rising Stars for 2025. He's a human rights lawyer, currently serving as NILC's Vice President of Litigation and Legal Strategy. He's also the author of My Boy Will Die of Sorrow, a memoir of immigration from the front lines. Everyone, please welcome to the podcast, Efrén Olivares.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks.
Hey, Efrén, good to have you here, compañero. You don't know me and I don't know you. So I always like to begin with folks is, one, where did you grow up? Like, where were you born, first of all? And then where did you grow up?
Yeah, I grew up in the small town of Allende, Nuevo León, about 30 minutes or so from Monterrey, which is one of the largest cities in Mexico, in northern Mexico. And for the first 8-9 years of my life, like, I was living in Mexico. Most of my family was in Mexico. I had some aunts and uncles that had come to El Otro Lado, but I was in Mexico, and nothing pointed to us moving. And then, so that's where I grew up. It's about 2.5-3 hours from the border. And when I was 9, and my dad moved to the U.S. looking for work, like so many other men in the 90s in Mexico. Yeah. And yeah, we stayed behind, and he came to the U.S. first.
Yeah, my father is from San Luis Rio Colorado, right on the border.
Yep.
So my father's a border baby, and también he came to the U.S. looking for work when he was 18 years old. He was a carpenter, and he talked about the border just crossing back and forth when he was a kid. It wasn't a big deal back then, and everybody knew. Folks worked on the other side and came back home. So when your family first came to the U.S., where did they folks land first?
So my dad came first, and he came to McAllen, Texas. He had been a truck driver in Mexico, and he found a job as a school bus driver here in McAllen. So for about 4 years, he was in McAllen, and the rest of us were back in Allende, and we couldn't visit him. We didn't have a visa or paperwork to visit, so he would travel back and forth, once a month, every 2 or 3 weeks for a weekend. And we were like that for about 4 years. Like you were saying, right? It's the normal thing for families living near the border. It's like, it is what it is. I didn't think much of it at the time. My friends, parents went to work and came back at night. My dad just came back 2 weeks later.
I'm 43 now, and I have all these stories of my parents, of my dad, of my mom when they came over, and every immigrant I talk to has an incredible story of how they made it to the U.S., how they raised families. So I'm always interested when people decide to write a memoir, and you decided to write a memoir, a story about your life. Why did you feel it was important to write it? Why did you feel your story needed to be out there?
You're an 82 baby like me. I'm 43 too. Yeah, 82 babies. Look at that.
And we still look good, Efrén.
Look
we
at
still
us.
Look good.
Hey. We're still climbing. So when I was in school, reading books in college and law school and whatnot, I always thought, it would be cool to write a book one day, but I never had an idea what it might be about. And then in the summer of 2018, I found myself, I was here in McAllen working for an organization called the Texas Civil Rights Project. And during the first Trump administration, my colleagues and I found ourselves representing hundreds of families separated at the border under the zero tolerance policy. And that summer, it never occurred to me that there might be a book to be written about that experience and the crisis that became. Dozens of families separated every single day in McAllen, which is only one of 19 courthouses along the border where this policy was being implemented. And many months later, the following spring, in April, I was invited to speak at my college where I went to first-generation college students, many of whom were also first-generation Americans or immigrants, and to talk about that work and representing families. And in giving that presentation, I started to see some of the points in common, right? Oh, yeah, I guess I didn't have my dad around for 4 years when he was in McAllen and the rest of us were in Allende. And I guess that was hard when my brother had a medical emergency and almost lost his life. My brother, whose name is Hector, by the way. And my dad not being around made that more difficult. And just reflecting on that, that gave me that's where the idea came from, to try to share the stories of my clients, which in my mind, when I was writing, that was first and foremost what I wanted to memorialize, so that what our government did to hundreds and thousands of families wouldn't be lost, and connecting it with my own immigrant experience, what it was like to have my dad leave first and the rest of us come later, what that meant for my identity as an immigrant. And I've learned in this process how common the separation is to the immigrant experience in this country, right? Because by definition, migrating entails separating yourself from something. It's your community, your home, very often your home country, but it almost universally also entails separating yourself from a loved one. It's not always a parent or a child, but it's often a close relative that, because of our immigration laws and policies, you have to not see for many years. And in some cases, it's 4 years, like in our case. In other cases, it's never again, right? And just what that means for the identity of immigrants in the U.S. And that's where the idea for the book came from. And I love how the interconnectedness of the two stories merge at the end. And the book, just to share a little bit more, is a braided narrative. So one chapter is about the 2018 crisis, and then chapter 2 is I'm 10 years old, my dad has moved to the US, and then chapter 3 is back to 2018, and so on, back and forth until the two stories merge.
Yeah. It's interesting, like my father passed away 10 years ago, and a lot of stories were lost with him, right? And so he didn't have a good relationship with his father, and so therefore we didn't have a good relationship with our grandfather. And these are things that have impacted me when now I've had to go back to familia to learn about my father's upbringing. My father didn't really talk about his life growing up. Did your family talk a lot about their immigration story? Were they quiet about it, or is this something that was talked about at home and that fed into the memoir, or these things that you had to go find?
I don't want to give too many spoilers, but my dad also passed away. He passed away when I was in law school, and it's an important part of the book, and a very emotional part of my immigrant story, because my dad went from driving a school bus one day to the hospital the next, and then he never left the hospital. He was never able to enjoy a single day of retirement. And that breaks my heart because of all the sacrifices he made for us, for his family, indirectly also for my own kids that I have now. And he never got to enjoy any of it. And to me, that poses a question of, is that the price that one has to pay to be a quote unquote successful immigrant? Is that success? Was he a successful immigrant? And did he quote unquote make it in the US? Did I? And but to answer your question on whether in our family we talked about immigration, so my grandfather was born in the US in the early 20th century, and that's why we were able to get our papers eventually, right? Because he was a U.S. citizen by birth, and then he grew up in Mexico, but had his U.S. citizenship. And back then, crossing the border was dictated more by the farming season and the harvesting season than by any immigration laws, right? So it was, you just worked during the season and then you went back home, etc. So the idea of living in the U.S. on the other side of the river was sort of not that controversial in my family. Like half my
Yeah.
aunts and uncles on my dad's side lived in the US and the rest of them in Mexico. On my mom's side, everyone is still in Mexico. It's only my mom that's here. So it becomes, part of your family identity in many ways, just to have this bicultural, binational, bilingual family.
Yeah. My dad, he was the second youngest of 9. So his oldest brother, my Tio Chulias, came to the US to work the fields. So he was part of the Bracero program. Right. So for folks who don't know about the Bracero program, is you got, World War II, a lot of the men left to war, and a lot of the industry, agriculture, plants were left without a labor force. And so the US needed a workforce, needed Mexicans to come to the US and do the work here in agriculture, poultry factories, meat factories, industry, and then would deport folks soon after that. And so my Theo marched with Chavez, was fighting for the rights of farm workers in that time. And so when my dad was growing up, he had seen his brother migrate back and forth, right? So going to the US and coming back was not a big deal. It was actually a relationship. They need us. We want to work. And that's what it was. But I always find it fascinating. I'm first generation. You're first generation. We're both 82 babies. We're both in our 40s. I remember in California, I was in 7th grade and I learned about Prop 187, right? And Prop 187, for folks who don't know, in California was a proposition that wanted to deny undocumented families and children of undocumented parents access to healthcare, access to public education. And that was me. And it was actually the bully, this guy named Rudy in middle school. Like everybody was afraid of Rudy, man, including me. And he came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder one day. He's like, "Hey, Hector." And I was scared. I'm like, "¿Qué pasa, man?" He's like, "Hey, they're trying to get rid of our parents. This Prop 187 thing. We got to be against it." Right. And it was like the school bully, right? And then we found out, hey, we're both brown kids, immigrant kids being impacted like this. And that was, for me, it was a really important thing of how I grew up and how I see immigration. How did growing up on the border, how did your dad's story, and then also ultimately becoming a lawyer, like, how do you see justice now? Like when we talk about the Department of Justice, your work as a lawyer, how is justice defined for you? How has it been shaped by your childhood?
I came into 7th grade. I was 13 when I got to McAllen. I was supposed to go into 8th grade, but I didn't speak English, so I was kept down a year. And I felt like I'm catching up ever since, right? I feel like I'm behind. But and I remember what Prop 187, when I got here, it was all over the news. It's a big thing. And I think in some ways, Prop 187 was when the pendulum swung in the opposite direction politically in California. So I keep waiting for something like that to happen in Texas, for example, or in Florida, right? Because the pendulum shall swing. It will swing. And, I growing up, I, had the phase where I wanted to be a doctor. And then I met a lawyer. And it's like, that would be so cool to be a lawyer so that people can call you licenciado. And that sounds so cool. And, all these words that I didn't know what they meant. And when I was in college, I sort of had my social justice and feminist awakening, taking some English classes and philosophy classes. And that's when my desire to become a lawyer continued, but now for a different reason, right? I thought of the law as a tool for justice and to effect change. And we can talk about how effective or not it can be. But that was the impetus for it. And I ended up back in the border in 2013 when 14 when the first quote unquote crisis of unaccompanied kids coming across the border. And that's when I started focusing on immigrants' rights and border issues and have been doing that work ever since. But I'm under no illusion that the laws that we have, the Constitution, the principles that in this country we say we guide our government by, they were created and written by other humans, and they were all men, and they were all white men that were just as flawed and virtuous as you and me, right? And to me, we've got to be rethinking whether those principles and those standards are the ones that we want to be living by today. And some of them are justice, equality under the law, the rule of law, democracy. But other things, for example, those men thought that only white men who owned property should have the right to vote. I don't agree with that. So when people say that we should ascribe to the Constitution the exact same meaning that was given to it in 1776 or 1789, like, so you mean that only white men who own property should be allowed to vote? Like, let's be real. That's what those folks thought. And I don't think that's right? So I think it's an evolving document that should adapt to the reality of the 21st century, not be stuck in the 18th century. The way I think of justice, to me, it's constantly a struggle between those with more power and those with less power. So I try to always side with the underdog, right? Even when I was in law school, I made a commitment to myself to try my best to offer the best possible legal representation to those who can least afford it. The outcome in any legal issue, in any legal case, should not depend on one's ability to afford a lawyer. On the contrary, right? It should depend, regardless of who the lawyers are, there's got to be a more just outcome. And fighting for that more just outcome is why I do the work that I do.
Yeah. Being again, first generation kid, I remember they would make you say the Pledge of Allegiance, right? First thing in the morning, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, for liberty and justice for all. And we're not seeing this liberty and justice for all, but that's something that I remember when I was a kid, I always thought about, like, everybody here should have liberty and justice. And it feels like it's up for interpretation who liberty and justice for all is. And as someone who's worked on the border for many years and has worked with families, what is something that people don't understand about the human cost of the immigration policy, and does it provide liberty and justice for all?
The crux of that question to me depends on how we define all. In my mind, it's everyone, regardless of what they look like, regardless of where they were born. It's justice for all. But for some people, all is those who are already here, or those who were born here, or however you want to define it, but in a different understanding of what it means to be all. That's where the problems arise on how we define all. One thing that always strikes me about life on the border is that, think about how people describe and talk about Quebec, Canada, and Montreal. Such a cultured place, 2 cultures, 2 languages, binational, bilingual, and they play that up. Well, it's the same here in the Rio Grande Valley, and it's the same in El Paso and Juarez, and the same in San Diego and Tijuana. Bicultural, binational, lively, rich, the history of 2 communities coming together. And yet the way we talk about it is, or it's talked about it mostly in the media or by certain politicians, is this lawless place full of crime, dangerous. When in McAllen, in the last few years, it's one of the cities with the lowest crime rates in the country. But you don't hear about that.
I didn't even know that till right now.
So I think part of the work that we do is highlighting that immigrant communities enrich our society so much, not just by the work we do, but by the hard work that we bring, the culture, multilingualism, right? Like, how awesome would it be? It's a superpower. We could be doing this interview in Spanish, right? Like, we can do that. And
ya sabes, carnal, ya sabes, lo podemos hacer en español, inglés o Spanglish si quieres.
Si quieres. Y eso es algo de lo que hay que estar orgullosos, no avergonzados. So yeah. I tell my kids, it's a superpower, and you're already ahead of the game by speaking 2 languages, and I hope you learn a 3rd and a 4th, right? So it's so close-minded in my view to say we're only going to speak English, and rather than celebrate growth and plurality and diversity is just, and time again in history, you see this repeating itself, right? Where closed-mindedness has a moment and then there's backlash and growth. I think we're in a problematic period and hopefully we won't be in it for a while, but I continue to believe that fighting for that promise of what this country can be is worth doing the work that we do.
Gracias, man. You know, I think about I had another interview with Mo Amer, and I was telling them I just got back from Morocco, and in Morocco everybody speaks Arabic, Spanish, English, French, Italian. They speak their native language, like the indigenous language. Like it was at least 7 languages that people spoke in Morocco. Everybody. And I was blown away. And then you come back to the States and it's like English only, right? And people forget that this land before colonization, 500 languages, 500 nations lived here. And people bartered, traded, co-created, co-lived here for thousands of years. 500 languages. And we can't get past one, right? And I feel like there's work to be done. And I feel part of it is us elevating the power of multilingualism. Like you said, it's a superpower. How do we elevate that story? So I'm with you 100%. You wrote a memoir. If I wrote a memoir, I think about the title, it would probably be in the time of love and fascism, or love in the time of deportations, because this is some wild times. Efrén, I'm going to say it before and I'm going to say it again. Not all heroes wear capes. And there's a story I heard about hundreds of Guatemalan kids that were being sent to be deported in the middle of the night to Guatemala, unaccompanied children. And it was you and a team of lawyers that was able to stop that deportation. And it was an incredible story. And so I'd love to hear more about, one, how you heard about that, and two, how your team was able to stop the deportation of these unaccompanied minors.
I am so proud of that team of lawyers. And I'll name them: Ilda, Kevin, Lynn, and our paralegal Meredith. Over Labor Day weekend, we heard rumors that there were plans to deport dozens, perhaps hundreds of Guatemalan kids that weekend. We heard about it on Friday afternoon and started trying to put together what that might mean and whether there was something we could do about it. I was traveling, most of the team was traveling, so I reached out to the team to see who might be available over Labor Day weekend because we may need to file an emergency lawsuit. And over the next 24, 30 hours, we started, putting it together, a process that in the normal course of business takes weeks to interview clients, collect declarations and affidavits, figure out what the legal claims are, and doing the legal research. All of that condensed into 24 hours to try to put it together. And we ended up filing that lawsuit, thanks to the efforts of that team, at around 1 a.m. from Saturday to Sunday. So it was early Sunday morning, 1 o'clock. And then I was on the phone with the emergency phone number of the federal district court in D.C. to try to wake up a judge and get that judge to issue an emergency order because airplanes were scheduled to depart with children in the next few hours, right? We did not know the exact time. It was unlike anything I've ever seen or done, Hector, because the shelters where the children were being held, keep in mind, these are all unaccompanied children who cross the border without at least one of their parents. In most cases, either parent. One of our clients is a 10-year-old who doesn't have any parent. Parents are not in the picture, have died, right? These are the children we're talking about. And they received that notification on Saturday night at around 11 p.m. telling them to be ready to be picked up to travel back to Guatemala within 2 hours. What kind of government does that? If you're doing something lawful, you don't do it in the middle of the night under cover of darkness with 2 hours notice on a holiday weekend. Come on, give me a break, right? So we lucked out that one of the security guards, court security officers at the court in Washington, was able to get a hold of the judge, She woke up and did what she needed to do, and we ended up having an emergency hearing at noon on Sunday, where the attorney for the U.S. government showed up and claimed that all of the children had their parents request that they be returned to Guatemala. We had affidavits under oath from multiple children saying, I don't want to go back. My mom has passed away and my father was abusive. I don't want to go back. I want to continue the process here in the US. And so many stories like that. And we were at the hearing and the airplanes were on the tarmac. At the time, we did not know how many children were on the planes. And the judge issued an order at the last minute that the planes should not take off until the issues were resolved. We later learned that there were 76 children on those planes. And I just can't help but think about what it must have been for them, right? They were woken up at 11 at night, 11:30, put in a bus, driven to the airport. Who knows if they were even fed? Put on an airplane, waited there for hours, and then eventually be told, you're going to come back and go back to the shelter where you were at. It's just such an embarrassing moment for our country that our government would be targeting orphaned 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we obtained an order from that court, from a different judge, saying that the children should not be deported for the duration of the case. And in that order, the judge made a couple of very poignant comments, including if the government had the right to remove the children the way they were trying to do, they wouldn't have done it in the middle of the night.
A question I'd like to ask to you, if you have anything specifically that everyday people can do who are as outraged as I was to hear about unaccompanied minors being deported. Are there specific things people can do at home to be part of the solution and support in these times?
If you're listening to this podcast, you are already privileged. You speak English, you have a computer or a smartphone on you, and that's a beginning of a privilege. If you're a U.S. citizen, that's an additional privilege, especially in this moment, and use that privilege to do something about it. So it ranges, right? Depending on where you live in this country, maybe calling your senator can make a difference. If you live in a purple state in particular, do call the senator. All politics is local. So even if your senator may not be aligned with the worldviews expressed on this podcast, and you think that calling your senator is going to be hopeless, maybe one of your city council members likely is able to help and aligned on these issues. So reach out to them, volunteer locally. There's nothing better to overcome bigotry than meeting somebody unlike you, right? And connecting and relating at that level. So depending on your profession and your time and your personal situation, whether you can attend a rally and protest or be involved in some other way, sign a petition, you were talking about that counts too. I would be remiss if I didn't say vote when the opportunity comes, when the next election comes. Even if there's a long line, there are going to be efforts to get turnout down in 2026. So it's going to be especially important that if you are bothered by what you're seeing from this administration, that we all show up en masse and vote for candidates that reflect our values.
Yeah. I've been saying it for a long time, like, use your privilege in the service of others. Right now if you're undocumented or you are a green card holder, you might not be able to go to the protest. You may not be able to take actions the way other people do. I'm making a call out for RCP, Raza con Papeles. If you have, if you have papeles, you have privilege, and you can do actions that other people cannot. And I love it. There's a lot of ways to get involved.
This is a moment when all of us need to use our privilege, whatever that looks like, in service of others. Because if we stay silent, silence is how they win. So let's make our voices heard.
Efrén, is there an update on the kids, on the children who were not deported, the young people? Is there an update on that?
So for a while, the government was there were rumors that the government was planning to do the same with children of other nationalities, because they started targeting Guatemalan kids, and then there were strong rumors that they were going to try the same with Honduran kids and other children. So we have asked the court to expand the class, so to speak, to cover children of other nationalities. That hasn't been resolved. So the current order is only for Guatemalan kids. But we are monitoring closely recent developments in the border to make sure that the government is complying with that order. As of today, mid-November 2025, we don't have a reason to believe that our preliminary injunction has been violated, but we're keeping an eye on that because the government, this wouldn't be the first time that this administration tries to go around a court order to achieve their ends. And again, it just boggles my mind why the focus on unaccompanied kids. Why is that the population that you're so intent on removing, even when the law says very clearly that they receive certain protections and there are processes that must be followed before an unaccompanied child can be deported. So that's where things are at. I don't think this is going to be the end of it. We're a few days away from the deadline for the government to appeal that order. So we'll see if they will appeal it, and then we'll continue litigating that case.
Efrén, we are part of the National Immigration Law Center podcast, and the work you're doing is national and not just regional or local. Is there any other litigation that's going on that you'd like to share about the work that NILC is doing in other parts of the country?
On this overlap between immigration, immigrant justice, and defending democracy, we have a lawsuit in Tennessee where we're challenging the deployment of the National Guard in Memphis by the Tennessee state government at the instigation of the president. So because, as I was saying earlier, militarizing our law enforcement poses risks for immigrant communities and beyond, we are challenging that. We have filed a motion for a temporary injunction to ask the court to stop that deployment. We're waiting for a ruling. So watch the space on that. And we are preparing a few other legal challenges in that space as well.
Órale. Gracias, compañero. Thank you so much. And compañero, I would be remiss if I did not bring up a recent honor that you received. Time magazine had just released 100 of the most influential folks, and you were named on there as a writer, as an advocate, as a lawyer for the work you're doing. How did you feel to receive that news and to receive that award now in these times?
It was really humbling and such an honor, especially given how dark times are right now for the work that I do and the rest of us do at NILC, when it feels like the world is against us and the odds of success are so hard. To have that work recognized by a magazine like Time was such an honor and a validation that the work that we're doing is making a difference and it matters and some people are noticing. And it's also a recommitment to keep doing that work, right? Because it gives me another platform to be talking about these things and shedding light on the injustices that are happening. I also view it as a testament of sorts to the sacrifices of my father, of other members of my family, the resilience of my clients, and the work that immigrant families are doing in this country every day. So I'm really honored to be the one on that magazine.
Felicidades, compañero. Felicidades. Gracias for your work and for the work you will do and continue to do. Gracias to you and the whole team at NILC. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And familia, that's what you call a beautiful human being. Gracias, Efrén. My big takeaway, like I've been saying throughout this whole podcast, is not all heroes wear capes. Mad love to all the lawyers, the litigators, the organizations who are on the front lines. Efrén shared eloquently and articulately like the work they have to do every day. You know, sometimes I could feel hopeless and helpless, but having a conversation with Efrén lets me know that there's people working around the clock, you know, in support of immigrant rights and human rights. And what can I do, right? Sign a petition, join a rapid response team, support a local organization. Those are easy things that I can do every day in my neighborhood. And eyes on the prize because, you know, midterms are coming. There's a lot of work to do locally to support the work that's happening nationally. So that was a wonderful conversation. And gracias otra vez, Efrén. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the episode of NILC's Freedom to Thrive podcast, Resistance, Justice, Resilience. To learn more about the work NILC is doing, visit nilc.org and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes.